Bueno, estimados
Distinguished permanent representatives and delegates, Ms. Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed, we have now reached the end of the general debate. And in wrapping things up, I would like to begin by expressing my condolences to and solidarity with the government and people of Indonesia, a country that was afflicted by terrible natural disasters in the last few days. I am deeply moved by the plight of the victims and by the sheer scale of the destruction that has been suffered by this country to which I bear so much affection. I also express my solidarity to Barbados and Japan for the large-scale disasters that have affected their people over the last few days. Your Excellencies, the debate that we are wrapping up today is a further indication of the ongoing relevance of this General Assembly and of the United Nations as a whole. This has been a week of meetings and of dialogue, a week in which the name of this organization, the United Nations, has made innumerable headlines and column inches in the press and on social networks around the world. This is the week in which the United Nations agenda has been at the top of the agenda in presidential offices. This week will set the tone, I have no doubt, for our work and our agenda throughout the coming year. It is also the week in which you and your teams have been under the greatest pressure. And now, in my case, as President of the General Assembly, it has been a week of countless meetings and events that have allowed us to make headway in the multilateral agenda and to strengthen regional and bilateral relationships. Nonetheless, I think each and every one of us could say with honesty that we are wrapping up this general debate on a high note with the satisfaction of a job well done. But this, of course, only marks the beginning of this 73rd session, and I hope very much that the enthusiasm and the efficiency that have been the hallmark of this week will last the course of the year. Your Excellencies, I would like to summarize the outcomes of this general debate in the following 7 points, and I promise you I will be brief. The first result or outcome, I would say, is the global reflection that we have all seen and engaged in on the role of this organization and the reflection on the importance of multilateralism as the only viable response to the problems facing humankind. There was almost unanimous agreement from the representatives of the more than 7.6 billion inhabitants of this planet on the irreplaceable role of this organization. We heard time and again appeals to strengthen multilateralism, and this left us feeling very satisfied. Yet it also represents a major challenge, that of ensuring that this organization is every day more relevant to our peoples and their needs. I borrow from the words of the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, who said, and here I quote directly, "After 7 decades, the United Nations continues to be the only institution with the necessary capacity and authority to facilitate that global cooperation that will do honor to us and benefit us all." End of quote. The second strategic outcome is that of having made this organization a home for all the nations of the world for a week. This entailed a Herculean effort in terms of logistics and coordination by the Secretariat and its staff, and I thank them all most warmly. But above all, what we have managed to create in making this a house for all nations is a space to deepen bilateral ties and to strengthen political and regional groups. This assembly has been the setting for hundreds of meetings bringing together heads of state and of government, ministers of varying portfolios, all contributing to the strengthening of ties between our nations thanks to having this forum, the general debate. Thirdly, we shared visions and experiences on issues of shared interest at more than 400 side events that took place this week. For the ordinary man or woman on the street, it might be mind-boggling to conceive that so many events could be held simultaneously. Nonetheless, to greater or lesser degree, we were all involved in this, exchanging experiences, sharing success stories, and forging commitments on issues of global interest. Fourth, during this debate, we crowned our deliberations with 2 political declarations that reflect the commitment of our states at the highest levels to eradicate tuberculosis and to combat non-communicable diseases. My fifth point is that this week 7 countries signed and a further 4 ratified the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, thus strengthening the commitment to a world free of the nuclear threat to which we all aspire. These latest steps bring the tally to 69 countries that have signed the treaty and 19 that have ratified this essential instrument. Sixthly, our heads of state and of government not only took this opportunity to take stock of the most sensitive issues facing the world, but they also shared the most significant progress in their own nations in terms of their sustainable development strategies, the building of peace, and respect for human rights. In sum, this general debate has been a space and a forum to share with the world national successes and national challenges, and also regional successes and challenges. Last, but by no means least, as is the case every year, this was not just a coming together of heads of government, but it also was the setting for meetings between hundreds of activists, of young people and leaders of social organizations who are the motor of the United Nations agenda and who play a key role in the implementation of the commitments that we reach here in this General Assembly. Your Excellencies, if we added together the content of all of the speeches delivered here, we would have a global snapshot, an X-ray, if you will, of the state of the world today. We would have a snapshot of the successes and also of the most pressing challenges facing our nations. And we would have a snapshot of the role that falls to this organization and to multilateralism. For this reason, we thank the commitment of all governments, without exception, to the United Nations, a commitment which was apparent in their presence here at this general debate and the statements they delivered. My thanks to the 121 heads of state and government, to the 9 vice presidents and deputy prime ministers, and to the ministers and permanent representatives who participated in this year's discussions. The messages that we listened to from all of you were as diverse in array as are the peoples of the world, and yet that said, there were many points of convergence and similarity and many shared concerns. I was delighted to see that delegations took the theme of this session and the 7 working priorities that I proposed as the starting point for their interventions. As the Prime Minister of Nepal said in referring to the theme chosen for the 73rd session, and here I quote the Prime Minister directly, the objective of making the United Nations more relevant to all peoples is very well reflected in the philosophy of leaving no one behind. Allow me now to turn to many of the issues that cropped up repeatedly throughout this general debate. Firstly, I was very much heartened by the fact that many countries rose to defend multilateralism and to defend the need for joint action to address global challenges. I agree fully with the statement made by the Prime Minister of Belgium, whom I quote, "Multilateralism is not an empty or vague concept. It is rather the conviction of inexhaustible dialogue." Whether it be international conflict or terrorism or nuclear proliferation, whether talking of climate change or natural disasters, or of the increase in inequalities and poverty, whether addressing migration and refugees or health and education, or whether talking about the impact of new technology and the world of work, we heard that we are faced with common challenges that require common responses. The President of Paraguay put it very neatly, summing up this idea by stating, and I quote him again, "Faced with an international stage characterized by political uncertainty and economic volatility, we need collective and integrated strategies underpinned by a sense of common responsibility." Your Excellencies, sustainable development and the threat of climate change were the topics mentioned most often by leaders throughout the debate, and rightly so. Nations are concerned by storms and hurricanes, by droughts that batter them with increasing force. This terrible and devastating phenomena lashed the regions of the Asia-Pacific, the Caribbean, and North America. These nations are concerned by the loss of harvests and by desertification. They're concerned by being left without drinking water in their main cities. They're concerned by rising temperatures, which mean that entire regions of their countries are simply uninhabitable. This hall heard from various voices an appeal for rapid and effective action, a clarion call for the financing of and implementation of the Paris Agreement. And here I quote from the President of France, who said, "People think it is too late, so let us hurry, let us not dally further." Many countries also use the opportunity of this general debate to share with us the progress they have made in the implementation of the Paris Agreements, pointing to successful steps in the areas of renewable energies and technology reconversion. The majority of heads of state and government and of ministers who addressed this assembly referred to actions that their nations are taking for the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. They referred to their policies to the benefit of the most vulnerable in society, measures taken to eradicate poverty, and to move towards inclusive and sustained economic growth. The leaders of the world also referred to this year's celebration of the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, underscoring as they did so the full validity and relevance of human rights, and reflecting the global call for achieving the full implementation and enjoyment of said rights. Many, in timely fashion, called once again for full gender equality as a sine qua non for sustainable development and peace. I was also encouraged that an overwhelming majority of member states expressed their support for the Global Compact on secure, orderly and regular migration. The mass displacements of persons, both migrants and refugees, has posed huge challenges which require in response clear policy and coordinated international action. Your Excellencies, we recall that this week, before beginning the general debate itself, we gathered together to pay tribute to the great Nelson Mandela, to his legacy and to his memory, to recall through the declaration that we adopted that one of our most important commitments and purposes ought to be that of working towards the building and sustaining of peace. The emphasis placed by global leaders on the need to invest more in conflict prevention and mediation reflects a paradigm shift, and not before time, a paradigm shift that we need to achieve sustainable peace. As we were reminded by the President of Liberia, who was referring to the successful conclusion of the peacekeeping mission in Liberia itself, and I quote, "We must never take peace for granted, nor forget the long shadows of conflict on the life of individual people." This general debate was also marked by positive events around the world, such as the peace agreements signed between Eritrea, Ethiopia and Djibouti, and the promising efforts and steps towards denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The President of Kenya, for example, when referring to current problems that face the world, stated that, and I quote him directly, that risks and threats are complex and they require more and not less cooperation, more and not less respect for the rule of law, more and not less negotiations. We need a rules-based multilateral system. And here I end the quote. Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General, thank you for your deep-rooted and unwavering commitment and for your tireless work over the last few days. Your leadership is vital in order to position this organization in such a way as to make it every day more relevant to our people. Your Excellencies, delegates, I would like to thank you for your work and for the efforts that you have made throughout this general debate and for your support to my presidency. I would also like to thank the staff and officials of the Secretariat and the technical staff who have allowed us to ensure that this general debate is ending on such a high note. In particular, I would like to thank all the vice presidents of this 73rd session who shared with me the task of steering the work of this General Assembly. Your Excellencies, before us lies the challenge of converting all the ideas and the commitments and the challenges that were highlighted throughout this week into tangible and concrete action, for which the hallmark must be greater efficiency in order to ensure that we have a greater impact on the life of people, particularly on the lives of those who most need the help and support of this organization. We need to make a difference, and the time to do that is now. Thank you very much.
Well done, thank you.
May I take it that it is the wish of the General Assembly to conclude its consideration of Agenda Item 8? It is so decided.